Hey guys, how's it going? Zach here, and welcome to the fourth lesson in this RTS tutorial series. In this lesson, we will cover camera panning. Before we get into the actual lesson objectives, I'm going to ask that if you don't like these cards, that you please listen to this part regardless, before going on to the tutorial proper. So, due to issues with the recording device I'm using, it sometimes seems to pick up the menus in Unreal, and other times it doesn't. I've worked out what's causing it not to. However, if I set the settings back, it will cause other issues. So I'll be using a new recording device after this video. And the reason why I've asked people who don't like these slides to stay and watch this part is to actually address this next point. I've had a comment on YouTube saying they don't like the slides, it's useless, and videos are a bit long, as part of pointers to sort of improve the video. I've had some feedback on Reddit and in private that have said, again, video's a bit long. I've also had feedback on Reddit and in private saying, people want these little lectures at the start because it's a tutorial series meant to help people learn. It's not a refresher. So given the sort of mixed feedback I'm getting, I really would appreciate hearing from you guys and knowing what you want. Do you want me to drop these introduction slides? Do you want me to use the slides and create a shorter sort of summary on the coding as a refresher for people, where I don't go through any explanation, I just do the coding? Or, like the last video, do you want me to put particular timestamps in? With that said, however, clearly I don't know how to do YouTube correctly. So, yeah, I'm also looking for help in figuring out how to do things correctly on YouTube in terms of setting up those sort of stamps. But let me know what you want. That said, I've also made a couple mistakes later in this video. I actually did the part in Unreal first, and one of the mistakes I made was I got the order and the topics I'm going to cover wrong. So there are a couple of other topics I totally skipped mentioning. I also skipped mentioning the fact that I want you, after this lesson, to do some work on your own. And I'm going to talk about that at the end of this slide series, though. So moving on from this, if you don't care about the sort of slides I go through at the start, know that I'm not going to have any next week, and I'll say why at the end of this one. But go on and jump to the head to the actual UE editor part of this. For those of you interested in, what we're going to do and the slides I put at the start, let's get into that. So our learning objectives this week or in this lesson, sorry, is to kind of, again, reinforce those skills we've previously developed, changing our input variables, calling those, our input, changing our inputs, calling those input actions up in our blueprint editor. And we're going to explore, what I plan to do is explore one way to achieve a panning effect. You'll see about partway into me doing it, I go, I wonder, and we explore a second way of doing it. You also get to see me make a whole bunch of mistakes doing this, mostly because I kind of fat-fingered a lot of things and typed incorrectly, or forgot in one case to hook a node up. That was when I was exploring the other method. Both methods do end up working in the end, so, and I will say my mistakes, I very quickly realized what's going on and address them, so very little umming and awing from me and trying to figure out what was wrong. And then we want to begin to consider our iteration of movement, because the bug I've been warning us about since the start of this will become apparent in the end of this lesson. So as usual, the blueprints involved, well, we are going to be using our player controller. It already holds our zoom and reset, it holds our controls to the camera so far, it holds our references to the pawn, and now we need to add our rotation or our panning controls in. So what do we need to consider? Well, this might sound really weird, but we kind of need to start with, what are we rotating? We've inherited movement from the floating movement component. Are we then rotating the pawn, the entire pawn, a component of the pawn, the controller, or both? Now, I will say, if you are struggling to work out what is causing the bug, at the end of the lesson, that is, return to this particular point and see what you can make of it at that stage. And then we need to consider, one, how do we tell the system that we want to pan, and two, how do we tell it to actually pan? Now, this might seem really obvious, because by now we know how to add input actions. We're just reinforcing that. However, this issue, this part we need to consider is we're going to tell it with a button press, most likely, and not with our mouse moving. So we did it every time our mouse moved. Anytime we went to select something, we'd suddenly start panning and we wouldn't be able to select anything. So we need to explore, how to do this in such a way that we can say, all right, now read our mouse in this way. And there are a few ways to achieve this effect and to address this issue. And we will explore two in this episode. They're essentially the same ways. They're just slightly different in how we achieve them. And I will say again that one is accidental and me going, I wonder. So yeah, we'll see those approaches. And I will say there are other approaches. In fact, I mentioned in the video that we can use other approaches. And this is kind of the difference in the next 2 points between what I call a one-part or a two-part setup. We will use a two-part setup because it allows you to explore the basic concepts. It allows you to build and iterate from there. But instead of having 2 parts, we might want only 1 part. And what I mean by 2-part versus 1 part is for each axis our mouse can move in terms of X and Y, I have 2 sort of output, and they're not actually output, but I'm going to call them that for now. I have 2 output nodes for the action we're doing. We can do it in one. And if we do so, we need to consider, are we taking the active mouse location, it's updating every moment, or are we getting the mouse location? And these subtle differences can really affect how you set up your code. And I challenge anyone who completes this tutorial to take what we've done here and turn it from a 2-part setup using and actively reading the mouse using mouse X and mouse Y to get mouse location. I do recommend using by DPI. It just tends to be smoother, and converting our setup from a 2-part to a 1-part setup. Also, actually, before we go on, another thing we need to consider is what do we want to have happen when we pan? What do we want? What would the effect be on the user if they're panning and zooming? What's the effect if they're panning and moving the camera? Now, we'll explore one of those two briefly. In terms of variables we're going to need to set our pan speed similar to our zoom speed. And again, yes, this will be open for people to change, again, for accessibility or user options. And all it does is it controls how fast the camera pans. And I didn't plan to include this, but because I made the mistake a little bit later, or not mistake, because I went, ooh, I wonder, and tried something else, we are going to include a second variable. And this is only a variable you're going to use if you use the second approach, which is a Boolean. And all it does is it says, we've pressed a certain key. Now, I don't set what key it is. In fact, actually, you can reuse this particular Boolean for other points where you might, need a key press to determine something. And, this won't be open for people to change. Now, moving on from this, when we are done, we will test the camera out, we'll make some changes, but we will see the issue with the movement controls by the end of this video. And next week, I will put out my solution to it. And I will say I have, in my test file, which I'll show a screenshot of in a minute so you can see the number of iterations, 3 different sort of main solutions, each with 2 or 3 different iterations, one case 7 iterations. So, prior to that video coming out, I want you to try to resolve the issue. Consider looking both at the pan controls, look at the hint I gave earlier, and at the sort of and the movement controls themselves. There are ways to address this issue from both points of view. Sorry, it's not really points of view. There's ways to address the issues, this issue by addressing things in either area, or sometimes, depending on your approach, in both. And so, as I said, I was going to show you some of my iterations. As you can see, I have many iterations of the same bits of code. I strongly advise as a good practice method of, sort of developing your own scripts here, is that when you do your first attempt, you comment it out. Even if it doesn't work, you comment it out and move it off to the side. Actually, I would duplicate it, comment out the duplication and move that off to the side, and then build again from there. And then when you get to your first working build, comment it, okay, duplicate it, comment out the duplication, and move it off to the side. The reason for this is when your first build, if it doesn't work, something gave you an idea to try that way. You might keep building from there, so having that original reference is useful. When you get your first functional build, it might not work fully. So having something to build off from, to review and look at again is useful. Several of these ones actually work, and yeah, I kept going to make them more functional or to increase certain, certain aspects that I liked or to remove aspects I didn't like. So there are numerous ways to go about doing this. Just keep trying, see what comes out. Because of the complexity and numerous ways to do this, I won't be doing an introduction video next week regardless. I'll just be jumping straight into iterating it, because all we are doing is we are reinforcing the concepts we have worked on this entire time. Alright, that said, let's load up our RTS and get started. And so here we are back in our editor. I'm going to be a little bit more pedantic today about actually keeping my editor how I want it to look, because as we get farther into this, we'll have a lot more things to do, and we'll need to be a little bit more mindful. Hopefully I won't have any recording errors like I did last time where I start to delete code. And yeah, so go ahead and open up the player controller. And as you can see, we have our zoom from last time, in and out, and our reset. I've commented these out because we are done with these pretty much. We aren't done with the begin play, nor are we done with the input, the move forward and the move right. But as I said in the start of today's video, we might actually keep these. We might do something different. I've been looking at different ways of doing movement, and I want to actually do a couple of different iterations in the next video, like I said. But first, let's finish up with this video, find the errors I was talking about. So, actually, we opened this up a bit early. I'm sorry about that. First thing we need to do is to go back to our map, open up our level, that is, open up our our project settings, and we need to add in our pan movement. So we need to go down to input. Now, I know some people add it in here using the turn rate that we had earlier. You're not going to do that. You can use it for their RTS cameras, and I've seen it done before. I just think there are better ways to do it. So we're going to open up action mapping instead. And we're going to add two new ones in. We're going to add in pan, which I'll hopefully spell right. And we're going to add in pan reset, which I'm actually going to camel code or camel case. And I'm just going to check my cheat sheet to see what the alternative keys I put in for this were. If I can get my cheat sheet to open up correctly. Awesome, there we go. So, my pan, I'm very confused by this because for some reason my cheat sheet now has one of my other project's codes partway mixed in from work. I'm going to ignore that for now and just focus on this. So, like usual, I have two movements for two keys for each. And this one will be middle mouse button. Now, if you remember, we used the middle mouse button before, but we used it with zoom, reset, and we have it with shift. There's nothing on this one. And then our alternative version will actually be our same key we used for an alternative on the zoom. We'll use page up, but we'll make this with alt. Oops, sorry. Yeah, we'll make it with alt, not command. Hang on, shift, control, alt. I was right the first time. And for pan reset, we'll do middle mouse button again. And just like with the zoom reset in the middle mouse button, we're going to use a secondary key. Because we already use Alt with the pan, we'll use Alt again. And likewise, we'll use Home like we did with the reset as our second key, and again, we'll use Alt. So as I said in almost every video we've been in here, this automatically saves. I'm not going to go over that again. Just go ahead and close it out. I'm just going to close these so when I reopen it, it doesn't look as jarring. Close that out. Okay, now we can go back in here, and I can find my references, our movement variables as well, and we're going to need to add a couple of variables into our movement variables, but we will do that in a minute. And we're going to just drag our camera reference off, and we'll get it. And what we want to do is we want to drag off here, and we want to get actor, if I can spell actor right, rotation. This node tells us, of course, what our actor's current rotation is. Add a reroute node into there. Sorry about that. I'm having a hard time speaking today. So, first thing we need to do is we need to get our keys. So, there's a couple of options we have. We can either do this twice or once. Now, in this iteration, we're going to do it twice so you can see the logic behind it. And I'll explain to you what the version where you do it once will look like. So we're going to right click, and we're going to do input. Actually, I'll just type in pan. We'll grab our pan. And I'll do the same. Actually, I've already typed it in. So I'll just type it there. And actually, now I'm going to shift gears, and I'm not going to start re-recording because we've already been through some issues doing that once before. So instead, I'm just going to say the reason why we're pausing is we're going to start with the reset like we did with the zoom. So I'm just going to type in pan reset. And the reason why we're starting with the reset instead of the zoom is, well, honestly, we kind of already did half of it, which was we were going to get all of this stuff pretty quickly that way. But we'll just do this now, get it out of the way. So dragging off the reset pressed, we're going to select or type in set actor rotation, which won't work because you actually need to drag it off the reference here to the node, to the camera. So set actor, again, if I can spell it right, rotation. Drag off the pressed, hook it into the set rotation. Hopefully you won't be having a fat finger day like I am apparently. So off of rotation, what we need to do is we need to tell the computer or the program where to reset the camera to. So what we need to do then is to get the current rotation. We need to break it so we can see the parts of the rotator or the rotation. And you know, we have roll, pitch, and yaw. Now, when we're rotating around the sphere, because that's what we're really rotating around, and what we're rotating kind of, well, what we're rotating around, we aren't really rolling. And yeah, we got some yaw on there. We can pan up and down when we get this set up properly. But it's really the pitch that matters. It's the pitch that of the camera that we're really kind of changing. So we're going to drag off the X, and we're going to make rotator off the X. The reason we're dragging off the X instead of the Y, which is pitch, or the Z, well, we could drag off the Z too, is we actually don't need the Z. So dragging off there just eliminates it. We don't need the yaw either, so we're going to get rid of it. We do need the pitch, and we need to set our own pitch. We're going to set it to 0. This is going to reset everything back to its default. And at its default is at -70 rotation, and we get everything back in place. Honestly, this part is done. I'm just going to clean it up a tiny bit, move this node back so it just looks a little bit nicer, and move that up there, move that back to a tiny bit. And I'm going to comment that out just because we are actually done with this part. Now, you could have used other things instead of set actor rotation, which we'll talk about in the iteration video, because we'll actually iterate a few different versions of panning as well there. So let's just grab these two nodes real quick since we'll need them. And let's actually move this further over because it's going to be in our way in a second. And let's do first let's hook up the pitch and, hang on, let's move these both up here. So what we are going to do at this point is we are going to, when this key is pressed, we are going to get some information, and based on that information, we will move the rotator. Now there are a few ways to do this. We can get the mouse's location and base it off the mouse location, which is the way you would do it if you want to do one node instead of the double node setup I have here. And again, we'll talk about that in the next video. I think seeing it split up this way, showing you both parts, kind of illustrates what the code is doing, and that is important. So off of here, we are, just want me to see what I use over here. We use set actor rotation. I should have grabbed that as well. We are going to take that again, and we are going to drag it over here, and we're going to do it twice. We're going to paste two of them because we need it twice. And just like before, we're going to come off the roll, and we're going to plug into there. Now, if you noticed, this doesn't really work. If we plug this all in, the camera's never going to move, even when we drag off of here. All it's going to do is going to set the rotation to this, and reset it to the same thing, and set it back. So nothing will happen if we do this. What we need to do is actually change one of these three. So we are going to do the x-axis first, which will change our yaw. So we're just going to unclick that, and you can hear some beeping in the background. I am going to quickly pause. I'll be back in a minute. Sorry about that little pause, not that I think it actually shows up on the camera. Though given my microphone just beeped at me, I'm not sure if that recorded. So again, in case it didn't record, sorry about that little pause there. My alarm for my food went off, so I went downstairs to check it. Yeah, I am doing dinner as I do this because this is actually the day the first two videos get released. And I want to be conscious and fed before the videos go live so I can respond to comments as needed if I get any. Alright, so first things first. We need to figure out what we're going to put in here. So we're going to make this our x, as I said, and this will be our y rotation. So what I want to get is, I want to get our mouse and our x-axis. So we have mouse events and we have mouse values. So mouse value, as you can see from the tip, returns the current value of the input axis of the mouse in the x position, and it provides, and then the mouse events provides the current value once per frame. Now, what we want is the once per frame version. The reason we want this is this tells us, as we move our mouse, where it's at. So we're going to use these parts together to get this to work. First thing, I'm going to drag this up a little bit. I'm just going to drag that into there so I have it set up. And with regards to the mouse, what we need from it is we need to get, well, what we're going to do with it actually is we're going to use the value off of here, and we are going to, actually I did this wrong, unhook the event. We're going to use the value off of here, if I can get this to unhook. We're going to use the value off of here to calculate our new z-axis, or z-axis for my fellow Americans out there. So we're going to drag off of this. We are going to do multiply, and we'll do float times float. In fact, I'm actually just going to drag this down to give myself some more room to play with. Now, what we're going to multiply this by is the first variable we need to create. So we're going to drag back, and we're going to promote to variable. And this variable will be one of our movement variables. And this will be our pan speed. So in terms of what our pan speed is, just so we can put our tooltip in, it is how fast, as I've pointed out in the tutorial, how fast our camera can pan. And we will make this editable, how do you say that word? You know what I'm trying to say. And we're going to compile, actually before we compile it, we'll move it to movement variables, we'll compile and save, and we're going to set this to a default of 5. Again, we've made this instance editable. We made it so you can change it. I'm going to eventually learn how to say that word correctly, so that users in an options menu can reset this. Now, with regards to the option menu, I just want to point out something real quick. we might actually have to change some of our controls. So in the option menus I've learned to do, I'm going to open up project settings to show you something. You don't need to follow along in terms of doing what I'm doing. What I have learned whilst doing option menus, and I am trying to figure out if there's another way to do this, is, as I'm looking at it, I just think I thought of one, is that these had to be separate. So you'd have move forward with W and up, for example, and move back with S and down as separate axis mappings. However, now that I'm thinking about this while looking at it, there is a very easy way to do this without changing it. So never mind what I just said. I might remove this from the recording if I can figure out how to use my video editing software. As you can tell, I'm not a graphics person. I do code. I think about the logic and all that fun jazz. All right. So now that we have our pan sensitivity times our our axis value, which should be a value of 1 if I'm not mistaken. So we'll return a value of 5. So when we move it, we'll move 5 degrees if we were to just plug this into here. However, we can't just plug this directly into there. And the reason we can't is we need to know what our starting yaw is. So we're going to come off our starting yaw, and we're going to do float plus float. So we're going to take our starting yaw, or as the camera moves, our yaw at the point we are still holding the button down and moving the mouse. So I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. We're going to plug this in, and we're going to plug this plug out into the other yaw in the make rotator. And now we have our rotation set up based on the movement of the mouse. Now, what I meant by this is when we start, and you hold the middle mouse button down and you move the mouse on the x-axis, the first value will be from here, the first value from here, from this original brake rotator, will be whatever the original value is. Let's say that's 0. So we move it slightly, 1 times 5. 0 plus 5 is 5. This becomes 5. As we move our mouse, this updates again. This is now 5. We move it again. 1 times 5 is 5. Plus 5 is 10. This is now 10. That gets changed. So it always increments upwards in that 5-step, 5 unit, whatever this unit actually represents. I'm never entirely sure what the scaling on this is of these values, but that's the joys of Unreal. It's something related to the metric unit. So now you notice we have two execute nodes that parts of nodes we have to hook up to this. How do we do that? Do we plug both in there? I mean, we could. Let's see what happens. Actually, I don't think we can, but let's see what happens if we try. Oh, we can. So I actually have never tried it this way. I'm curious. Yep, nothing happens. So that isn't our option. What we're going to do is we are going to, when we press this, we are going to use a gate. Ooh, that reminds me to talk about multi-gate later on. So what happens is when something enters a gate, and in fact, this isn't what's going to enter, this is going to open our gate. What happens is when something enters our gate, it's what comes out on the exit, and it's what's affected. So what we're really affecting is our mouse's location. Or what we're using for the effect is our mouse's location. So we want to plug that in. Now, a gate will only work, this code, this enter and exit part, will only work if the gate is opened. And as you can see, the gate starts closed here. Now, what we need to do is we also need to close the gate. Well, this one's relatively simple to think about. The user's holding the mouse button down. The second they let go of the mouse button, we should no longer move the camera. So we're going to close the gate when they release the button. So let's test this. Oh, we also are skipping one thing, sorry, before we test this. Actually, I'm actually going to undo this because that might explain why this didn't work. So to undo it, I'm just going to delete it for now. I'm going to plug this back in, and I'm going to plug the press back in just to see if this will work. And the reason why I didn't before, potentially, we'll actually know if I'm right or wrong in a second, is we didn't tell it what it's rotating. Right now, it thinks it's rotating the controller, and the controller has no representation on the map. What it's really going to rotate is the root component of this reference. So when we drag off of here, it's going to, oh, okay. I'm used to wanting to do the root. I've done things slightly differently than my cheat sheet. Let me just double check I haven't screwed anything up by double checking my cheat sheet. Oh, no, I'm wrong. I'm thinking of the alternative iteration. I'm looking at the alternative iteration for next episode. We don't need the root component. That will be in the next version of this. Let's test this and see if this works. Oh, yeah, it does work without the gate. Now, what I'm curious about is... Alright, you can see we have a problem. I'm holding the W key. That's W. That's A. That's S. That's D. So the camera, while it's rotating around the object, our sphere, is not rotating in terms of the controls. That's the bug I was talking about all along, by the way. So we're going to close this out. Now, what we are going to do, we guess we don't really need the gate. We're still going to do something else to this code. We're going to modify it a little bit. But before we do that, let's do our second half. Let's do our y-axis. So, we are going to copy all of the... Ooh, sorry, don't drag off the node like I did. Copy all of this. We are going to drag this off. We don't actually use the Z on the y-axis. Obviously, we are going to use the pitch. So we're going to drag pitch off of here and plug it back into there. So now that when we move the mouse, and we're also going to change this out, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to use mouse Y. So now that when we use the mouse, on the y-axis, we update the y-axis in the same way we did the z-axis up here. We're going to drag this off into there. And we're going to drag off of here, which is why that node is there, into there. I add another reroute in, if I can double click on that line nicely. Drag that off. We're going to drag this off. And we're going to drag this off and plug it both into the set actor rotation. Compile, save, and let's test it. Ooh, we're running into an issue. What issue might we be running into? Anyone want to take a guess what I forgot to do? So, yeah, got to plug that in. I'm being a little bit careless. Sorry about that. Compile, save, run it again. And there we go. And we seem to have some issues. Ooh, we have a lot of issues. Okay. So, I can tell you that issue, because of the way the mouse is moving, is on the y-axis. That should have been obvious, because it didn't happen when we were doing the Z. And we also know about the two bugs with regards to the camera movement outside of that. So we now have 3 bugs we need to address. One, we'll address in this lesson. The next we'll address in our iteration lesson. And the third we'll address in the map bound lesson. And those issues are, well, the first one in this lesson is what you just saw when we were panning, how the camera jerked and did those weird things and sort of kind of twisted on itself a bit when it got underneath our sphere. The second is the fact that when you are panning, or you've panned off the normal direction, so you now are facing on your originally on your y-axis, so you've changed from your facing down what was our original Z. And when I say original Z, I mean Z in relation to our pawn. And you've rotated that pawn, so you're now facing, the camera's now facing down the y-axis of that original pawn. The controls don't rotate. That's actually not the issue we'll address on this one, but that is the one we'll address with the iteration fixes, where we'll come back and look at different ways of doing this and different ways of doing this. So different ways of doing our pan and different ways of doing our movement. With regards to the issue with the panning itself, we'll address on this one, as I said, and the map bound issue where the camera can go off the map, we'll address in that lesson. Now, there's actually a 4th error, which we haven't looked at yet, but it's kind of hard to see right now for a couple of reasons. One, the issue with our y-axis, and the issue with the movement kind of obscures it. But once we fix the y-axis issue, we should be able to see it. Now, the way to fix the y-axis is fairly simple. We're just going to drag these off. I want to drag this one as well. And drag it there. We're going to unhook that, and we're going to put a clamp in. And remember, what a clamp does is it says, take the result... Not clamp access, sorry. We want to clamp float. So remember what a clamp does. It says we're going to take this value from our addition, or whatever we hooked it up to, so in this case our addition, and we are going to say it can't be any bigger than our min and any larger than our maximum. And we're going to plug it in. So let's just space this a little bit more nicely. So with this, and this is a lot of experimentation and error, there are different numbers you can try. So let's think about what our 0 is. Let's set this to just, sorry about that. Fortunately, opens in another window. Let's set this to 10 for a minute and leave our min at 0. Let's just see what happens. And this is kind of what I did to work out like values I like using, and there's a little bit of a range. So as you can see, we're now limited in terms of where we can go. Except for that 0 doesn't tell us much, does it? Let's change, or that 0 and 10 doesn't tell us much. So let's change this to 50. So we have one large value and one small value. The reason why I'm using a large and small value where I have 0 is I can tell what this min actually is. So 0 wasn't that up and down. 0 is this part where I come back up, it seems. This is my 0. Let's just double check I'm right. Let's change this to -10 for a minute. Yep, as you can see, I can move further up now. Let's change this to -50. So we have 50 and 50 and see what happens. I can pan further over, and I can pan further down. Though I have to say, at 50, when I can pan over like this, it just does not feel right to me. I don't like that. I like it closer to 10. Let's try 25 and see what that's like instead. So let's just go a little bit higher than what I liked it at. You know, 25 isn't bad. In fact, actually, the range I tend to recommend is between 25 and 10. I'm actually going to leave it at 25 for now. And this 50 isn't bad either. Actually, I prefer 45 if I have a higher number there. I don't know why. Just, something about it just moves more smoothly to me. And this is just my preference. So now we have our pan set up in terms of that. So as you can see, actually I'm going to reset it. Now we are facing down our z-axis, sorry, our x-axis. We're looking down our z-axis towards the ball, which you can't see because this is a flat 2D space. The screen being 2D space, not the GUI. But this way is our x and our y. So if we hit W, if we hit W, we go forward. And, oh, hey, look, I found another bug. I am not using my mouse right now. Sorry, I'm not using my middle wheel. So, we've addressed one of the bugs that we found. We found another one. Let's add that gate back in that we talked about earlier. And the reason why we want to use a gate is we don't want this firing without this happening. Currently, this is saying whenever you press the button for it, or the mouse moves, do this. We only want it to do it when the mouse is moving and when the button has been pressed. Now, technically, you could use a if function, you know, come off of this and have a Boolean value, is pressed, set true, is pressed, set false, you know, off x, if, you know, is pressed true, then do this. That is one option. In fact, actually, we'll do that down here so you can have a sort of gander at what that's going to look like. We'll just remove this one, and we'll do, oh, we can't promote to variable off of this because there's something to promote. We'll do is pressed. And we're going to just drag it and set it. So is pressed is set, and is pressed is not set. If you can hear a weird sort of whirring sound in the background, that is just my computer having a heart attack on me. So off of here, we're going to drag out a branch, which is nicely plugged into the true, and we're going to drag is pressed. Let's make sure this works. So I've clicked on the map, moving my mouse, nothing happens, move it, and it's working in all directions. So those are the kind of the two ways you can approach it instead of using gate. Anyway, as I was saying, we're now facing down the x-axis with the y-axis running underneath. If you imagine a line underneath top-down template. So I'm going to pan the camera so we're on that y-axis, and I'm going to hit W, and I go the wrong way. I'm going to hit up, and I go the wrong way. Sorry about sneezing there. I was trying to cover the mic in time. So we have an issue with that, and I'm going to leave this for now just so you have two different ways of doing it available to you. In the next, when we do the iterations, I will do multiple versions of this, and I'll set one I like to use for it. So I forgot to show you the other error I was going to show you, the one that was slightly obscured. Well, we can move and pan at the same time. In fact, actually, you know what? I want to make this even more obvious. There's something I was going to do in a later video. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to go up here and off our reference. Actually, no, because this needs to happen in sequence. If the reference cast doesn't work, we need to know. So we need to have a sequence. It's really nice when we type in sequence off something or an if off of something, that it adds it into that first slot for us by default. So the sequence says run this, then run this. And what we want it to run is, let's see, set game mode, set input mode, game and UI, and game mode only. Ooh, sorry, that's not what I wanted. I wanted game mode and UI. And we do not want to hide the cursor. We want a reference to self off the player controller. If I can spell self right, again, having a fat finger day. And we have no widget in focus, so let's compile and save, make sure our mouse shows up. Okay, it didn't, so let's just delete this real quick. Sometimes, for some reason, it doesn't. We'll do show cursor. And we'll click show cursor is true. If I can get to stay. Compile and save, and our cursor's there. Okay. So, whoops. Okay, so I did this early. I was going to do the cursor on the pan scroll, or edge scroll, so you can see some other issues. So one of the issues we have when we're edge scrolling, by the way, is you can still pan, and you can still pan when you're doing this. And that, for some people, looks weird, and that's problematic. So the way you can address this is we can create a new Boolean variable, and we're going to do that now. We're actually going to just do disable cam movement. Just make sure I spelled that right. Disable cam movement. I did. And we will save this. We will compile it. I mean, not save it. We'll move it. We'll create a new reference group called bool. The reason I haven't moved is press there is I did not plan to make it, and I have no plan on keeping it right now. I'm actually going to explore this between the next couple of videos to see if I prefer this to gate. And actually, as you saw in the start of this tutorial today, you know, I save all my iterations so I can stress test them later on to see if I do a variation between using these booleans and this branch versus using this gate, which one eats up more system resources. Yeah, I realize these are little differences, but I save these towards the end to actually stress test, but yeah. So we now have disabled camera movement. We have to put this in two spots. First, we need to drag it off the is pressed. Drag this out a bit so we can see. And we want to set that to true. Now, this is going to do nothing. All we're doing is changing a variable. All we're doing is changing its value from false to true. And we're going to drag it off released, and we'll set it to false. We'll do the same down here. We'll set the... Ooh, you can just actually just plug that into there. Makes that nice. So we don't make any mistakes. Okay, I'm kind of liking the if version of this slightly better. And just so this is a little bit easier to read, and I can't marquee select because of that node under there. We'll just drag that off there. Yes, I know this looks a little bit dirty. Don't worry, we'll clean it up in a bit. So what we need to do now is actually implement these commands. We need to drag off our move right and our move forward and add a branch. Again, lovely for us is that it plugs it in automatically. And we're just going to put in disable camera movement. So if it's true, well, actually then this is a problem. We want it to be false. Now, what you can do if you prefer is, set this to be, name this cam movement enabled or something else like that and set it off true. I tend to keep my names as simple as I can with regards to what I'm doing. So disable cam movement. If that is true, I do not want the camera moving. Or enable cam movement. If that is true, I want the camera moving. So my naming convention will kind of decide how I set the branches up. Alternatively, I could drag off of here, type in not, and plug that in instead, and then make that true. But the less steps we have to go through in terms of that, the happier I am, and the happier the code tends to be, and the less potential for issue there is. Again, we're just going to drag a branch off our move forward and add our disable cam in. So let's compile and save. Make sure that worked. I can still move. Just going to troubleshoot something. I might not like this if statement anymore. Great, I can still move. Ah, I forgot to change that to false. Right, now I can't move. Awesome. Let's plug in the is pressed is true. Yep. Compile and save. And yep, we cannot move. Now let's make sure our resets are working. So that's our pan reset, and our zoom reset is suddenly not working. Okay, well, let's take a look. So I'm going to zoom in, just want to make sure. Oh, I had it set to shift. I was hitting the wrong key. I meant to actually do control. So, whoops. You can set the however you want. Okay, so what we've done for today works. I am just going to quickly make an edit to this. Going to go to my project settings. I'm kicking myself for having closed everything I wanted in here. I'm going to open up my zoom. Oh, not my zoom. My zoom reset, my pan, and my pan reset. I actually am going to change my shift over to control. But I prefer it on. So make sure nothing else is set to shift in here. Nope. Okay. There we go. I'm going to close that. I'm just going to compile and save that to be on the safe side. And I'm going to run this. There we go. Now, maybe you want your camera when you pan, if you're like all the way over here, to actually go back to this angle. So if you want to do that, all you do is you go back to your code after you stop running the example, and you go to your reset. So let's drag that over since we can have this back over here now. And, well, let's try and see what they do. Let's undo the X first and try that one. You know, you should know, by the way, that it's not going to be the X, it's going to be the Z probably. Oh. Yep, that did nothing. And the reason why you know it's probably going to be the, you knew it shouldn't be the X and it should be the Z, is because, what do we edit over here? Our Z and our Y. So, let's undo this. Set those both back to 0. What happens? Ooh. It resets that way. Now, you might not like that. You might just want it to go above the camera again. That's kind of what I like. So, we're going to set it like that for this, for me. Again, we're not going to touch this code again, really. You can set this how you want. Likewise, you can do the same here. You can kind of edit this how you want. We aren't going to return to it. Now, that is true for the most part. We will return to it to replicate these for the server to do networking. So now that we've done that, let's clean this up a bit. You know, as I said, I'm not going to comment it out because we're not done with it. You only see me comment things out when we're done with them, and you know, feel free at that point to do whatever the heck you want with them. Yeah, I caught myself about to swear there. So let's make this look a little bit nicer. And I know that eats into video time, so you can head out at this point if you want, because we're not doing much else. I'm just going to move this all the way over here. Actually, move that there. How did I get it looking nice in my other version? That's the question. Oh, honestly, I really didn't, to be fair, as I look at it. So yeah, to actually make this nice, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight everything, we're unselect the gate, and we're going to just move it down slightly. The reason I am moving it down slightly and moving pan up is so that blue line is a little less, you know, covered. Move this forward, and yeah, I'm happy with this. So I'm going to compile and save, and that completes today's lesson. Now, we will go over fixing those movement issues in terms of, you know, the fact when we are in the y-axis for our original design, we go the wrong direction. We will fix, of course, the fact that we can go outside of our map, and oh my god, trying to get back onto the map is really hard. Intuitively, I'm hitting the wrong keys, even though I know what's going on. And we'll view some other ways of doing both the pan and the movement as we go on. And because we've added the cursor in and all that stuff, we're going to move this way up there, just so I know it's there. And we're going to take our pan, and we're going to move it just further down, just so we have a little bit more room to play with when we do this stuff. And we'll also move the zoom out of the way too. Okay, that completes everything we're going to do in today's lesson. Just make sure to save everything, and in your content browser, hit Save All or Control-Shift-Save, and that should cover everything. So we'll return, we'll do our iterations, we'll do our boundaries for the level, and that will complete our basic camera work we need to set up in our basic movement material. From there, we'll move into setting up our resources, and actually, it's not true. Before we move into setting up our resources, I'm going to do a recap lesson where I won't do anything new. I will go over our completed code in review, part by part, so you can double check you have everything I have. You can double check what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I can re-explain material as we go. After that, we will move into our lesson on setting up our resources, our section on setting up our resources, which will be multiple lessons. As always, likes are greatly appreciated, as are comments. Please let me know what you want to see in the series. Please let me know what works and what doesn't work. And remember to subscribe and hit that notify bell, and so you can know when that next tutorial is up. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a lovely day.